The bright morning sun streamed through the windows of San Francisco International Airport as passengers lined up at Gate B-23 for their flight to Washington, D.C. Among them stood a distinguished woman in her late 50s, dressed in a navy blue pantsuit, scrolling through her phone while occasionally glancing at her boarding pass. The woman was none other than the Vice President of the United States, though she preferred to maintain a low profile during her personal travels. She had just finished attending a climate change conference and was heading back to the Capitol for an important Senate session the next day. As the boarding process began, the Vice President waited patiently in the first-class line. A young flight attendant, who had recently joined the airline, was checking boarding passes at the gate. The attendant, in her crisp uniform and perfectly tied hair, seemed to be having a challenging morning, her movements tense and her smile appearing forced. When the Vice President approached, she handed over her boarding pass with a warm smile. The flight attendant glanced at the document, then up at the Vice President, then back at the pass. Her expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, and finally to something harder to read. "I'm sorry, but I'll need to see additional identification," the attendant said, her voice carrying across the gate area. Several passengers looked up from their phones, curious about the developing situation. The Vice President calmly reached into her bag and produced her government ID. "Of course, here you are," she said, maintaining her professional demeanor. The flight attendant studied the ID for an unusually long time, her brow furrowed. "I'm not convinced these documents are authentic," she declared loudly. "This can't be right." By now, other passengers had stopped what they were doing to watch the scene unfold. A senior flight attendant, who had been organizing boarding passes at the desk, noticed the commotion and approached swiftly. "Is there a problem here?" the senior attendant asked, immediately recognizing the Vice President. Before anyone could respond, the younger flight attendant continued, "This woman claims to be the Vice President. I find that hard to believe." Her tone carried an unmistakable edge of prejudice that made several nearby passengers shift uncomfortably. The Vice President took a deep breath, her years of experience in handling difficult situations evident in her composed response. Instead of showing anger or frustration, she smiled gently and addressed both flight attendants. "I understand you're doing your job and security is paramount," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Perhaps we could step aside for a moment to resolve this without delaying other passengers?" The senior flight attendant quickly intervened, "Madam Vice President, please accept our sincerest apologies. There's absolutely no need for additional verification. Please, allow me to escort you to your seat." But the Vice President raised her hand slightly, indicating she wasn't finished speaking. The gate area had grown remarkably quiet, with every nearby passenger and airline staff member listening intently. "I'd like to take this moment to share something important," she said, turning to address the younger flight attendant directly. "Throughout my career, I've encountered similar situations many times. Each time, I have a choice, to react with anger, or to use it as an opportunity for growth and understanding." She continued, her voice carrying warmth and wisdom, "Your job is crucial for passenger safety, and I respect that. But part of ensuring safety is understanding that leadership, success, and authority come in all forms. When we let our preconceptions cloud our judgment, we not only fail to do our jobs effectively, we miss the chance to learn from each other." The younger flight attendant's face had turned a deep shade of red, her eyes now fixed on the floor. The Vice President's words seemed to echo in the hushed terminal, touching not just their immediate situation but reaching into something deeper, more universal. "I believe in second chances," the Vice President added, "and in the power of learning from our mistakes. Perhaps we could start this interaction over?" The senior flight attendant stood speechless, moved by the Vice President's graceful handling of the situation. Other passengers had begun to pull out their phones, not to record the confrontation, but to capture this unexpected moment of teaching and reconciliation. The younger flight attendant finally looked up, her eyes glistening with tears of shame and realization. "Madam Vice President, I am so sorry. My behavior was inexcusable. Thank you for that acknowledgement, the Vice President responded with genuine appreciation. Now, shall we proceed with boarding? I believe we all have places to be. As she was escorted to her seat, passengers spontaneously began to applaud, not just for her status, but for the lesson in dignity and leadership they had just witnessed. The incident had transformed from what could have been an ugly confrontation into a powerful moment of learning and growth. The story quickly spread throughout the plane, with passengers sharing what they had witnessed through whispered conversations. The Vice President's response had demonstrated how to confront bias with grace, how to turn conflict into conversation, and how to lead by example even in unexpected moments. As the flight prepared for takeoff, the younger flight attendant found herself deeply reflecting on her actions and assumptions. The Vice President's response had not only challenged her prejudices but had shown her a better way to interact with all passengers, with respect, professionalism, and an open mind. The incident would later become a teaching moment in the airline's training programs, though names and specific details would be changed to protect privacy. It served as a powerful reminder that true leadership isn't just about holding a position of authority, it's about how one uses that authority to create positive change, even in challenging situations. This first part of our story sets the stage for a broader exploration of how one moment of confrontation can lead to lasting change, not just for the individuals involved, but for everyone who witnesses or hears about it. The Vice President's response would continue to ripple outward, touching lives and changing perspectives in ways no one could have predicted on that sunny San Francisco morning. As the aircraft reached cruising altitude, the atmosphere in the cabin remained charged with the lingering energy of the gate incident. The Vice President sat quietly in her first-class seat, reviewing documents on her tablet, while occasionally glancing out the window at the clouds below. But beneath the peaceful exterior, something remarkable was beginning to unfold throughout the aircraft. In the galley, the senior flight attendant was having a heartfelt conversation with her younger colleague, who was still visibly shaken by the incident. "I've never felt so ashamed," the younger attendant whispered, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged beverages on the service cart. "The way she handled it. I never expected that." The senior attendant placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "What matters now is what you learn from this," she said softly. "In all my years of flying, I've never seen someone turn such a tense moment into such a powerful teaching opportunity." Meanwhile, in the main cabin, passengers were sharing their perspectives on what they had witnessed. A high school teacher traveling with her students was using the moment as an impromptu lesson in civics and human dignity. "Notice how she didn't just react," the teacher explained to her attentive students. "She chose to educate and uplift instead." A businessman in his mid-40s leaned across the aisle to join the conversation. "You know, I've been in corporate leadership for 15 years, he shared, "but I've never seen such a masterclass in handling conflict. No anger, no public shaming, just pure grace and wisdom." As the flight progressed, the younger flight attendant found herself gathering courage. After serving beverages in economy class, she knew she needed to do more than just accept the Vice President's graceful handling of the situation. With encouragement from her senior colleague, she made her way to the first-class cabin. The Vice President looked up from her tablet as the flight attendant approached. Before she could speak, the young woman's voice quivered with emotion. "Madam Vice President, I know I've already apologized, but I need to say more," she began. "Your response to my behavior, it's made me see things differently. I didn't just fail at my job today, I failed as a human being." The Vice President gestured to the empty seat beside her. "Please, sit for a moment," she said warmly. "Sometimes the hardest conversations are the most important ones." As they talked quietly, the flight attendant shared her background, growing up in a small town, rarely interacting with people different from herself, carrying unconscious biases she hadn't even recognized until this moment. The Vice President listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and sharing her own experiences of breaking barriers throughout her career. "You know," the vice president said, "what happened today isn't just about you and me. It's about every person who's ever been judged unfairly, and every person who's had the courage to acknowledge their mistakes and grow from them." Their conversation was interrupted by light turbulence, prompting the flight attendant to return to her duties. But as she walked back through the cabin, she stood taller, moved with new purpose. Passengers noticed the change in her demeanor, the way she now made eye contact with everyone she served, the genuine warmth in her smile, the extra moment she took to ensure each person felt truly seen and respected. Word of the gate incident and its remarkable aftermath had spread throughout the plane. Passengers began sharing similar experiences from their own lives, moments when they'd faced prejudice, times they'd learned from their mistakes, instances where a single interaction had changed their perspective forever. A grandmother traveling with her granddaughter used the moment to talk about her own experiences growing up in the civil rights era. Sometimes, she explained to the wide-eyed child, the strongest response to ignorance isn't anger, it's wisdom and compassion. As the flight continued eastward, the cabin had transformed into a space of reflection and connection. Strangers were engaging in meaningful conversations about bias, leadership, and the power of second chances. The vice president's handling of the situation had created a ripple effect, turning what could have been a divisive incident into a unifying moment of shared learning. The senior flight attendant observed these interactions with amazement. In all her years of flying, she'd never seen passengers so engaged with each other, so open to vulnerable conversations with strangers. She made mental notes, knowing this experience would influence how she trained future flight attendants. Near the end of the flight, something unexpected happened. A passenger passed a note to the flight attendant who had caused the initial confrontation. It read, "Thank you for showing us that it's okay to make mistakes and learn from them. Your honesty about your growth today taught us as much as the vice president's grace." The note brought fresh tears to the young attendant's eyes, but this time, they were tears of gratitude and hope. She realized that by acknowledging her mistake and showing genuine remorse, she had become part of the lesson rather than just the catalyst for it. As the plane began its descent into Washington, D.C., passengers found themselves reluctant for the journey to end. The shared experience had created a unique bond among them, a reminder of humanity's capacity for growth and connection. The vice president gathered her belongings, pausing to share a final word with the young flight attendant. "Remember," she said quietly, "true strength isn't in never making mistakes, it's in how we learn from them and help others learn too." As passengers deplaned, many stopped to thank both the vice president and the flight attendant, not just for the lesson they'd witnessed, but for showing how authenticity and vulnerability could bridge divides and create understanding. This transformative journey would continue to resonate long after the plane touched down, proving that sometimes the most powerful changes begin with a single moment of confrontation transformed into an opportunity for growth. The story of what transpired on that flight spread rapidly through Washington, D.C.'s political circles and beyond, though not in the way many might have expected. Instead of becoming a scandal or a source of outrage, it evolved into a powerful narrative about leadership and transformation. In the days following the flight, the airline's corporate headquarters was buzzing with activity. The incident had prompted serious discussions about improving their training programs. The senior flight attendant, who had witnessed the entire interaction, was invited to share her observations with the airline's executive team. "What struck me most," she explained during the meeting, "wasn't just how the vice president handled the situation, but how it changed everyone on that flight. We saw a real shift in how passengers interacted with each other and our crew." The airline's CEO leaned forward in his chair, deeply engaged. "Tell me more about the young flight attendant's transformation. How did this experience affect her performance?" The senior attendant smiled, remembering the remarkable change she'd witnessed. By the end of the flight, she was a different person. The way she served passengers, her attention to detail, her genuine care for others, it was like watching someone discover their true calling. Meanwhile, at a local coffee shop near Capitol Hill, two passengers from the flight happened to run into each other. The high school teacher and the businessmen recognized each other immediately, and soon found themselves sharing a table, discussing how the experience had influenced their own lives. "I used that moment as a lesson in my classroom yesterday," the teacher shared, stirring her coffee. "My students were captivated. We talked about how real leadership isn't about asserting authority, but about turning difficult moments into opportunities for growth." The businessman nodded thoughtfully. "I had a situation at work this morning. An employee made a significant mistake. Before that flight, I might have reacted differently. Instead, I remembered how the vice president handled herself, and I turned it into a mentoring opportunity." In the airline's training center, the young flight attendant from the incident had been invited to speak to a new class of trainees. Her hands trembled slightly as she stood before them, but her voice was steady as she shared her story. "I thought I knew what professional service meant," she began, "but I was carrying biases I didn't even recognize. That day taught me that true service means seeing every person's humanity, regardless of your preconceptions." The trainees listened intently as she described how the vice president's response had transformed not just her approach to her job, but her entire worldview. "She could have had me fired. She could have publicly shamed me. Instead, she chose to teach me, to help me grow. That's the kind of person I want to be now, someone who helps others learn and grow, even in difficult moments." At a community center across town, the grandmother who had been on the flight was leading a discussion group about bridging generational and cultural divides. She shared her experience from the flight, using it to illustrate how moments of conflict could become catalysts for understanding. "What amazed me," she told the group, "was how one person's response to prejudice could create such a powerful ripple effect. It wasn't just about that moment, it was about how that moment changed how we saw each other, how we talked to each other, how we understood our own biases." Back in the airline's corporate offices, the incident had sparked a broader conversation about systemic change. The HR director had been working on a new training module focused on unconscious bias and inclusive service. The flight's events would be used as a case study, though with names and details altered to protect privacy. "We need to address not just overt bias," the HR director explained during a presentation, "but the subtle assumptions we all carry. This incident showed us how these biases can surface in unexpected ways, and more importantly, how we can transform these moments into opportunities for growth." The story continued to spread through social media, though not through viral videos or angry posts. Instead, passengers from the flight shared thoughtful reflections about what they had witnessed and learned. Their posts sparked meaningful discussions about leadership, forgiveness, and the power of choosing education over confrontation. A popular leadership podcast invited the businessman from the flight to share his perspective. "What struck me most," he reflected, "was how the vice president's response created a space for everyone to examine their own biases. It wasn't just about that one interaction, it was about how we all choose to handle difficult moments in our lives." The young flight attendant, continuing her regular routes, found herself approaching her work with a completely new perspective. She paid special attention to passengers who seemed anxious or out of place, going out of her way to make them feel welcome and respected. One day, she received a letter from the airline CEO, commending her not just for learning from her mistake, but for having the courage to share her story to help others learn. "Your journey," the letter read, "reminds us that our greatest mistakes can become our most powerful opportunities for growth." In Washington, D.C., discussions about the incident focused not on the initial confrontation, but on how it exemplified effective leadership in action. Policy advisors and leadership consultants pointed to it as a real-world example of how to handle bias and conflict in professional settings. As weeks passed, the story's impact continued to ripple outward, touching lives in unexpected ways. It became a reference point for discussions about dignity, leadership, and the power of choosing understanding over anger. The incident had shown how a single moment, handled with grace and wisdom, could create lasting change in countless lives. The vice president herself never publicly discussed the incident, maintaining her commitment to handling such situations with dignity rather than seeking publicity. Her silence on the matter only added to the power of her actions that day, showing that true leadership often speaks loudest through example rather than words. 3 months after the flight incident, its impact continued to resonate in unexpected ways across different sectors of society. The story had evolved beyond a simple narrative about confrontation and response. It had become a catalyst for institutional change and personal transformation. At the airline's headquarters, a new training initiative was being launched, inspired by the events of that day. The program, titled Leadership in Every Moment, focused on teaching employees how to transform challenging situations into opportunities for growth and understanding. The young flight attendant, who had been at the center of the incident, was now regularly invited to participate in these training sessions. Standing before a group of airline employees one morning, she shared her ongoing journey of self-reflection and growth. "Every day, I think about how differently that situation could have ended," she explained to the attentive audience. "I could have lost my job, faced public shame, or worse. Instead, I was given a gift, the chance to learn and help others learn too." During one particularly memorable session, an older flight attendant raised his hand. "I've been flying for 20 years, he said, his voice filled with emotion. "And I've seen so many confrontations end badly. How do you handle the shame of knowing you made such a serious mistake?" The young attendant paused thoughtfully before responding. "The shame was overwhelming at first," she admitted. "But I learned that shame only serves a purpose if it leads to growth. The real work begins when you choose to transform that shame into positive action." Meanwhile, in a bustling university classroom, the incident had become part of the curriculum in a course on organizational behavior. Students analyzed not just the immediate handling of the situation, but its longer-term implications for corporate culture and leadership development. "Consider how this single interaction created change at multiple levels," the professor explained, drawing diagrams on the whiteboard. "Individual transformation, organizational policy changes, and broader societal impact. It's a perfect example of how mindful leadership can create ripple effects throughout an entire system." In the corporate world, the story had taken on a life of its own. The businessman who had witnessed the incident found himself repeatedly sharing the experience during leadership workshops and board meetings. His company had even revised its conflict resolution protocols, emphasizing the importance of turning confrontational moments into opportunities for collective growth. One day, during a high-stakes client meeting, he faced a situation that tested these principles. A client had made an insensitive remark about one of his team members. Instead of reacting defensively or ignoring the comment, he remembered the vice president's approach. "Let's pause for a moment," he said calmly, channeling the same grace he had witnessed on the flight. "I believe we have an opportunity here to understand each other better." The resulting conversation not only salvaged the meeting but strengthened the client relationship in unexpected ways. The high school teacher who had been on the flight continued to use the experience in her lessons, but with an interesting twist. She had developed an interactive exercise where students role-played different ways the situation could have been handled, then discussed the potential outcomes of each approach. "What we learned that day," she often told her students, "wasn't just about handling discrimination. It was about the choice we all have in difficult moments, to react with anger, or to respond with wisdom and compassion." In the aviation industry, the incident had sparked a broader conversation about customer service and human dignity. Other airlines began incorporating similar scenarios into their training programs, recognizing that technical proficiency needed to be balanced with emotional intelligence and cultural awareness. The senior flight attendant who had witnessed the entire incident found herself increasingly sought after as a mentor. During one mentoring session, a rookie attendant asked her about handling difficult situations. "The key lesson I learned that day," she shared, "was that our job isn't just about serving drinks or giving safety instructions. It's about creating an environment where every person feels seen, respected, and valued." At a leadership conference in Chicago, the incident was referenced during a keynote speech about crisis management and emotional intelligence. The speaker highlighted how the vice president's response had demonstrated the highest principles of leadership, the ability to maintain composure, show compassion, and create teaching moments even in challenging situations. True leadership, the speaker emphasized, isn't about the position you hold or the authority you wield. It's about how you use your influence to lift others up, even those who may have wronged you. The grandmother who had shared the experience with her granddaughter found that their conversation had opened up an ongoing dialogue about prejudice, forgiveness, and growth. The child, now more aware of these issues, had started a kindness club at her elementary school. "My granddaughter taught me something beautiful," the grandmother shared during a community meeting. "She showed me that when we share these stories with young people, they don't just learn about handling conflict, they learn about the kind of person they want to become." As the seasons changed, the story continued to evolve and find new relevance. In corporate boardrooms, classrooms, and dinner table conversations, it served as a touchstone for discussions about leadership, bias, and the power of choosing understanding over anger. The young flight attendant, continuing her regular routes, found that her experience had given her a unique ability to connect with passengers and colleagues alike. She became known for her exceptional ability to handle difficult situations with grace and understanding. Every day, she reflected in her personal journal, "I try to honor the lesson I learned that day. Every interaction is an opportunity to show someone the same grace and wisdom that was shown to me." The incident had become more than just a story, it had become a model for how individuals and organizations could handle moments of conflict and bias. It demonstrated that true change often begins not with grand gestures or public statements, but with individual choices to respond to difficulty with wisdom, compassion, and a commitment to growth. 6 months after the flight incident, its influence had reached far beyond the airline industry, touching lives in ways that no one could have predicted. The story had become a powerful example of how a single moment of conscious leadership could spark lasting change across different communities and institutions. On a crisp autumn morning, a diversity and inclusion summit was being held at a prestigious university. The main auditorium was packed with educators, corporate leaders, and community organizers. The young flight attendant had been invited as one of the keynote speakers, marking her first major public speaking engagement. As she approached the podium, her heart racing beneath her professional exterior, she saw hundreds of faces looking back at her expectantly. Taking a deep breath, she began to share her story, but this time with a new perspective that 6 months of reflection had brought. "When people hear this story," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word, "they often focus on the vice president's response. But today, I want to talk about what happens after such a moment. How do we turn a single instance of learning into lasting change?" In the audience, a group of corporate executives leaned forward, particularly interested in her insights about personal transformation in the workplace. The flight attendant continued, sharing how the incident had changed not just her professional approach but her entire worldview. She described a recent situation where she'd noticed a fellow crew member showing subtle biases toward a passenger. Instead of staying silent or responding with judgment, she had found the courage to have a private, compassionate conversation with her colleague. "The real challenge," she explained, "isn't just learning from our mistakes. It's helping others learn from them too, without making them feel ashamed or defensive. It's about creating spaces where people feel safe enough to acknowledge their biases and brave enough to change them." Meanwhile, at the airline's corporate headquarters, the ripple effects of the incident continued to influence policy and practice. The training program inspired by the event had been refined and expanded, with remarkable results. Employee satisfaction scores had improved, and customer complaints related to bias or discrimination had decreased significantly. The airline's chief human resources officer shared these findings at an industry conference. "What we've learned is that addressing bias isn't just about rules and regulations. It's about creating a culture where every interaction is seen as an opportunity for connection and growth." In the education sector, the high school teacher who had witnessed the incident had developed her classroom exercise into a full curriculum module about conflict resolution and leadership. Her approach had caught the attention of the school district, and she was now helping other teachers implement similar programs in their classrooms. During one particularly meaningful class discussion, a student raised their hand and asked, "But how do you know when to respond with kindness instead of anger when someone treats you unfairly?" The teacher shared what she had observed on the flight. Sometimes, the most powerful response isn't about proving you're right or making someone feel wrong. It's about helping them see a better way forward. The businessman who had witnessed the incident found that his revised approach to conflict resolution had transformed his company's culture. In a meeting with his leadership team, he reflected on the changes he'd observed. "We're seeing fewer defensive reactions and more productive conversations," he reported. "People are learning to view mistakes and biases as opportunities for growth rather than reasons for punishment." The story had also found its way into unexpected places. A group of healthcare professionals had adapted the lessons into a training module about patient care and cultural sensitivity. A tech company had incorporated elements of the story into their customer service protocols. At a community center in the heart of the city, the grandmother who had shared the story with her granddaughter was now leading regular discussions about bridging generational and cultural divides. Her granddaughter's kindness club had grown into a school-wide initiative, proving that wisdom could flow from young to old just as easily as the reverse. "The children teach us so much," she often said during these sessions. "They show us how simple it can be to choose understanding over judgment, curiosity over fear." The senior flight attendant who had been present during the incident found herself increasingly recognized as a thought leader in customer service training. During one session with new recruits, she shared an observation that had become central to her teaching. "Every interaction with another person is a choice," she explained. "We can choose to reinforce walls of prejudice and misunderstanding, or we can choose to build bridges of connection and understanding. The technical aspects of our job are important, but it's these choices that truly define our service." As the story continued to spread and evolve, it began to take on different meanings for different communities. For some, it was a lesson in leadership and crisis management. For others, it represented the possibility of personal transformation and growth. For many, it served as a reminder of the power of choosing wisdom over reaction in moments of conflict. The vice president's approach had demonstrated a form of leadership that didn't rely on authority or position, but rather on the ability to transform difficult moments into opportunities for collective growth. This lesson resonated particularly strongly in professional development programs, where participants were learning to navigate increasingly diverse and complex workplace environments. "The most powerful leadership moments," a management consultant noted during a workshop, "often come not when everything is going smoothly, but when we're faced with challenges that test our values and assumptions." As autumn turned to winter, the young flight attendant found herself reflecting on how far she had come from that morning at the gate. She kept a small notebook where she documented moments of connection and growth, both her own and those she witnessed among her colleagues and passengers. In one entry, she wrote, "Today, I helped a nervous first-time flyer feel at ease. 6 months ago, I might have been too focused on procedures to notice their anxiety. Now I understand that every interaction is an opportunity to show someone they matter." The incident had become more than just a story about handling bias or conflict. It had evolved into a broader narrative about the possibility of transformation, both personal and institutional, and the power of choosing wisdom over reaction in moments of challenge. 1 year after the memorable flight, the impact of that day's events continued to evolve in profound and unexpected ways. The story had become a catalyst for change in professional training, education, and community building, touching lives far beyond its original context. On the anniversary of the incident, the airline organized a special symposium focused on transformative leadership and inclusive service. The venue, a modern conference center overlooking the city skyline, was filled with industry professionals, educators, and community leaders eager to learn from the experience. The young flight attendant, now promoted to a training specialist position, stood before the audience with a confidence that came from a year of deep personal growth. Her presentation focused on an aspect of the story that hadn't received much attention: the power of vulnerability in leadership. For months after the incident, I struggled with whether to keep sharing my story, she revealed to the attentive audience. But I realized that by being open about my mistakes and growth, I could help others feel safe enough to examine their own biases and assumptions. During the symposium, a panel discussion brought together various individuals who had been on that flight. The senior flight attendant, the businessman, the teacher, and others shared how the experience had influenced their approaches to leadership and conflict resolution. What stands out to me now, the businessman shared, is how this one incident created a template for handling difficult situations with grace. In my company, we've started asking ourselves, what would the vice president do when facing challenging moments? The high school teacher's curriculum had been adopted by schools across the state, and she shared data showing improved conflict resolution among students. The most remarkable thing, she noted, is watching young people apply these principles naturally, without prompting. They're learning that strength doesn't mean domination, it means having the courage to turn conflict into connection. During the lunch break, an unexpected reunion occurred. The grandmother and her granddaughter, now a year older and even more passionate about social justice, ran into the young flight attendant near the refreshment table. The meeting was emotional for all three. "Your mistake," the grandmother said gently, "became a gift to my granddaughter. She learned more from watching how that situation was handled than from any book or lecture about respect and understanding." The granddaughter, now running her school's expanded kindness initiative, shared stories about how she and her classmates were applying the lessons they'd learned from hearing about the flight. "We created a wisdom over reaction club," she explained proudly. "When there's a conflict at school, we try to handle it the way the vice president did." In the corporate world, the incident had become a case study in several major business schools. A professor of organizational behavior had tracked how the story's influence had spread through different industries, creating what she called the ripple effect of conscious leadership. At the airline's headquarters, the impact was particularly visible. Employee satisfaction scores had reached historic highs, and the company had become known for its innovative approach to service training. The CEO shared these results during his symposium address. "What we learned," he explained, "is that excellence in service isn't just about procedures and protocols. It's about creating an environment where every employee feels empowered to transform difficult moments into opportunities for connection." The senior flight attendant, who had witnessed the original incident, had developed a special training module called Moments of Truth. In it, she taught new recruits how to recognize potential turning points in customer interactions. "Every day, we have countless opportunities to either build walls or bridges," she would tell her trainees. "The choice we make in those moments defines not just our service, but who we are as human beings." The story had also influenced policy changes across the aviation industry. Several major airlines had revised their training programs to include more emphasis on emotional intelligence and cultural awareness. Industry publications regularly referenced the incident as a turning point in how airlines approached customer service training. During an afternoon breakout session at the symposium, a group of diversity and inclusion specialists discussed how the incident had influenced their work. One consultant shared how she used the story to help organizations understand the difference between reactive diversity training and transformative inclusion practices. "What made this situation so powerful," she explained, "was that it didn't just address the surface-level behavior. It created a moment of genuine transformation that rippled outward to touch countless lives." The young flight attendant, listening to these discussions, found herself reflecting on her own continuing journey. In her new role as a training specialist, she had the opportunity to share her experience with hundreds of new employees, but she never presented it as just a cautionary tale. "This story isn't about avoiding mistakes," she would tell them. "It's about understanding that our mistakes, when handled with humility and a willingness to learn, can become powerful catalysts for positive change. As the symposium drew to a close, participants shared their own stories of how the incident had influenced their approaches to leadership and conflict resolution. A healthcare administrator described how she'd used the principles to transform her hospital's approach to patient care. A tech company executive shared how the story had influenced their customer service protocols. The day ended with a powerful moment of reflection. The young flight attendant, standing before the audience one final time, shared a personal realization. "A year ago, I thought this story was about one person's graceful response to bias. Now I understand it's about something much bigger. It's about our collective capacity for transformation when we choose wisdom over reaction, understanding over judgment, and growth over shame." The symposium had demonstrated that the incident's impact continued to grow and evolve, touching new lives and inspiring new approaches to leadership, service, and human connection. What had begun as a moment of potential conflict had become a lasting testament to the power of conscious leadership and the possibility of positive change. 18 months after the flight incident, its influence had rippled out even further, touching lives and institutions in ways that transcended its original context. The story had become a powerful symbol of transformation, not just in the aviation industry but across diverse sectors of society. One crisp morning, at a major international leadership conference in Chicago, the young flight attendant-turned-training specialist found herself sharing the stage with influential voices in organizational development. The conference theme was "Transformative Moments in Leadership," and her story had become a centerpiece of the discussion. "When people ask me how this single incident created such lasting change," she began, addressing the packed auditorium, "I tell them it's because it wasn't just about what happened that day. It was about how that moment continued to teach us, challenge us, and transform us long after the flight landed." In the audience sat representatives from global organizations, each finding new relevance in the story for their own contexts. A United Nations diplomat took notes about applying these principles to international conflict resolution. A tech industry executive contemplated how this approach could transform customer service in the digital age. The airline industry had undergone its own evolution since the incident. The training program developed in its wake had been refined and expanded, becoming known as the transformative service model. Airlines worldwide had begun adopting elements of this approach, recognizing that technical expertise needed to be balanced with emotional intelligence and cultural awareness. During a panel discussion, the senior flight attendant who had witnessed the original incident shared a powerful observation. "We've seen a fundamental shift in how we view our role. We're not just serving passengers anymore, we're creating moments of connection and understanding, even in challenging situations." The impact in education had been equally profound. The high school teacher's curriculum had evolved into a comprehensive program called Leadership in Action, now implemented in schools across multiple states. During a workshop session at the conference, she shared stories of how students were applying these principles in their daily lives. "Last week," she recounted, "one of my students broke up a potential fight by asking both parties to step back and consider what they could learn from each other. These young people are internalizing these lessons in ways that will shape their future leadership styles." The businessman who had witnessed the incident had gone on to establish a consulting firm specializing in transformative leadership practices. His company worked with organizations to develop what he called wisdom-based responses to workplace challenges. "What we learned from that flight," he explained during his presentation, "was that leadership isn't about position or authority. It's about the ability to transform moments of potential conflict into opportunities for collective growth." The grandmother and her granddaughter had become regular speakers at community events, sharing their intergenerational perspective on the incident's impact. The granddaughter's school kindness initiative had grown into a regional youth leadership program, inspiring similar efforts in schools across the country. "What amazes me," the grandmother shared during a conference breakout session, "is how this story continues to resonate with young people. They understand intuitively that true strength lies not in asserting power, but in creating understanding." Healthcare organizations had found particular value in the story's lessons. A major hospital system had incorporated elements of the transformative service model into their patient care protocols, leading to improved patient satisfaction scores and better outcomes in challenging situations. The chief nursing officer explained, "We realized that every interaction with a patient or family member is an opportunity to either build trust or create distance. This story helped us understand how to consistently choose connection over confrontation." In the corporate world, the incident had become a cornerstone case study in emotional intelligence and crisis management. Major companies had revised their training programs to emphasize what they called transformative leadership moments, situations where conscious choices could turn potential conflicts into opportunities for growth. The young flight attendant's personal journey had continued to evolve as well. She now led workshops not just for airline staff but for organizations across various sectors. Her sessions focused on what she called the 3 pillars of transformative interaction: awareness, choice, and growth. Every difficult moment presents us with a choice, she would explain. We can react from a place of defensiveness or fear, or we can respond from a place of wisdom and understanding. That choice defines not just the immediate outcome, but the ripple effects that follow. The airline's training center had become a hub for innovative leadership development. Visitors from around the world came to observe and learn from their approach to service and conflict resolution. The walls displayed quotes and principles drawn from the incident, serving as constant reminders of the power of conscious leadership. During the conference's closing session, a surprise video message was played. It came from a passenger who had been on that flight 18 months ago but had never publicly shared their story. Their message captured how the incident had influenced their own approach to leadership. "What I witnessed that day wasn't just good crisis management, it was a masterclass in human dignity. It showed us that true leadership isn't about winning or being right. It's about creating spaces where everyone can grow, learn, and become better versions of themselves." As the conference drew to a close, participants shared their commitments to applying these principles in their own contexts. The young flight attendant's final remarks captured the ongoing nature of the transformation. "This story doesn't have an ending," she concluded. "It continues to grow and evolve through each person who chooses to transform a moment of potential conflict into an opportunity for understanding. Every day, in countless ways, we all have the chance to make that choice." The impact of that flight continued to ripple outward, touching new lives and inspiring new approaches to leadership, service, and human connection. What had begun as a challenging moment at an airport gate had become a lasting testament to the power of choosing wisdom over reaction, understanding over judgment, and transformation over conflict. 2 years after the flight incident, the story's legacy had matured into something far more profound than anyone could have anticipated. What began as a tense moment at an airport gate had evolved into a global movement for transformative leadership and conscious interaction. At a prestigious international forum on social change, held in a sunlit convention center overlooking the Pacific Ocean, leaders from various fields gathered to discuss the lasting impact of what had become known as the flight that changed us. The young flight attendant, now a respected authority on transformative leadership, delivered the forum's opening address. Her presence on stage reflected her own journey of growth, poised, confident, yet maintaining the humility that had become central to her message. 2 years ago, I made a mistake that could have ended my career, she began. Instead, it became the beginning of a journey that would touch thousands of lives. Today, I want to talk about what happens when we allow our most challenging moments to become our greatest teachers. The airline industry had undergone a remarkable transformation since the incident. What started as one company's response to a singular event had grown into an industry-wide movement. Airlines around the world had adopted training programs that emphasized emotional intelligence and cultural awareness alongside technical skills. During a panel discussion, the senior flight attendant who had witnessed the original incident shared statistics that demonstrated the impact. Customer satisfaction scores had risen across the industry, reported incidents of bias had decreased significantly, and employee retention rates had improved. But the numbers only tell part of the story, she explained. The real change is in the countless daily interactions that never make headlines, moments where someone chooses understanding over confrontation, wisdom over reaction. The education sector had seen equally impressive developments. The high school teacher's curriculum had been adopted by schools in multiple countries, translated into several languages, and adapted for different cultural contexts. During her presentation, she shared video messages from students around the world. What these young people show us, she said, wiping away tears of joy, is that the principles of transformative leadership transcend cultural and linguistic boundaries. They understand that true strength lies in the ability to turn conflict into connection. The businessman's consulting firm had expanded globally, working with organizations to implement what he called the wisdom choice model. During his keynote speech, he shared how companies were measuring the impact of this approach. "We're seeing organizations transform not just their customer service," he reported, "but their entire corporate culture. When people understand that every interaction is an opportunity for growth, it changes how they approach everything, from everyday dealings with colleagues to major strategic decisions." The grandmother and her granddaughter had become powerful advocates for intergenerational learning. Their story of how the incident had sparked meaningful conversations about bias and understanding between generations had inspired similar programs worldwide. "My granddaughter taught me that wisdom doesn't always flow from old to young," the grandmother shared during a workshop. "Sometimes, it's our children who show us the simplest path to understanding and connection." The healthcare sector had emerged as an unexpected beneficiary of the incident's lessons. Hospitals and medical centers had incorporated the principles into their patient care protocols, leading to improved outcomes and reduced conflicts between staff and patients. A leading hospital administrator shared her experience. "In healthcare, we often face high-stress situations where emotions run strong. The lessons from this incident have helped us transform potentially confrontational moments into opportunities for deeper understanding and better care." The tech industry had also embraced the story's principles, particularly in the realm of artificial intelligence and human interaction. Companies were developing AI systems that incorporated elements of transformative interaction, aiming to create technology that could facilitate rather than replace meaningful human connection. During an afternoon session focused on future applications, the young flight attendant shared her vision for the continued evolution of these principles. "As we face increasingly complex global challenges, the ability to transform conflict into connection becomes not just valuable, but essential for our collective survival." The forum included virtual participants from around the world, each sharing how the story had influenced their communities. A peace activist in a conflict zone described using the principles to facilitate dialogue between opposing groups. An environmental leader shared how the approach had helped bridge divides between industry and conservation interests. The airline's training center had become a global hub for transformative leadership development. Visitors from diverse fields, education, healthcare, business, government, came to learn how principles from the aviation industry could be applied in their contexts. As the forum drew to a close, participants were asked to write letters to their future selves, describing how they planned to carry these principles forward. The young flight attendant's letter, which she chose to share with the audience, captured the ongoing nature of the transformation. "Dear future self. Remember that every day brings new opportunities to choose wisdom over reaction, understanding over judgment. Our journey didn't end with that flight 2 years ago, it began there. Each interaction is a chance to create ripples of positive change that touch lives we may never see." The vice president's response to that moment of bias had demonstrated a form of leadership that transcended position or authority. It showed that true leadership lies not in the power to command, but in the wisdom to transform difficult moments into opportunities for collective growth. As participants departed the forum, they carried with them not just new ideas and strategies, but a deeper understanding of how single moments of conscious choice could create lasting change. The story had become more than a lesson in handling bias or conflict, it had become a blueprint for transforming human interaction in an increasingly complex world. The young flight attendant's final words at the forum encapsulated the enduring legacy of that memorable flight. When we choose wisdom in our moments of challenge, we create possibilities that extend far beyond ourselves. Every interaction becomes an opportunity to contribute to a more understanding, connected world. The story continues to evolve, touching new lives and inspiring new approaches to leadership and human connection. It stands as a testament to the power of conscious choice and the possibility of transformation that lies within every challenging moment.